I'm here with Dave Rullo, who is a Temple board member and staff writer for the Pittsburgh Jewish Chronicle, and I'm so glad you are joining us today. Dave, how you doing?
I'm okay. How are you?
I'm all right. Kind of a trying time, isn't it?
It certainly is. It's a challenge to stay safe and healthy, but thank God we are, and most of the people we know have been safe and healthy throughout this. So it is an adjustment to the new normal, but I think we're making it. And in terms of quarantines, this is pretty mild. We can still go to the grocery store. We can still Zoom and talk to people. So it allows for some connections that maybe wouldn't have been here even 5 years ago, which is nice. So
That's true. Although it still is a quarantine. You are now 3 people trapped at home. How's Jack doing? Is Kim holding in there?
yeah, I think they're both good. Everyone's doing well. It's interesting because now we're working and doing school from home, so each person has to find their corner of the world, lay claim to it, and try to find some way to remain sane during those 8 hours where normally there would be interaction with other people about your work. And maybe that's the hardest thing, I think, at least for me, is that during the workday, even with what I do, which is sort of an isolated sort of career, you still talk to your fellow employees and trade stories, information, all of that. And that's sort of what we are losing in this work from home age, is that ability to just have a conversation about how the day's going over coffee or at the water cooler.
Absolutely. So are you working from home right now? Are you doing all of your interviews by telephone, by video? How does it work?
I am working from home, and I would say that I spent a lot of time out of the office in any case, because that's what the job entails. It's a lot of interviewing, it's a lot of writing, which doesn't necessarily work well in an office. I need to be creative, so I find that spot where I can best be creative. But so I do interviews at home right now, either on Zoom or through Zoom or through Facebook or through Skype or the telephone. Normally, I would do a lot more at a coffee shop, at a restaurant. As much as one of the catchphrases I think of the last 15 years in Judaism has been relational Judaism, and I like to do relational journalism, which is where I'm sitting across the table from somebody, having a conversation, looking at them in their eye. It just makes for better journalism. It makes for better stories, and that's really what I do, is tell other people's stories a lot of times. So you can do it by Zoom, you can do it by Skype, but it's not always the best way. So I do my interviews by, like I said, digital means, and then I write from home, and I really miss a coffee house. I really miss going there on a Friday and spending 4 hours with headphones on and writing. That's what I found.
And I imagine those coffee houses miss your business right now as well.
They certainly do. Hemingway used to go to a bar every morning and would write until he knew where the story that he was working on was going, and then he would stop. I use coffee instead.
Probably better, both for the story and
I think
for
so.
you.
And I don't know. I think that it takes time to get into the rhythm when you add something new to a creative endeavor. And a lot of people, I think, now we're probably just starting to hit our comfortable point. So we're comfortable now at home. So maybe now things will start feeling like they did, both for us and for the reader, or for, if it's a design person, for what they're seeing in front of them or whatever else. But now I think we're finally starting to get used to the fact that we aren't where we were comfortable, and we're not so conscious of doing the work the work's just coming now from where we are. So.
Sure. So, in a pre-coronavirus pandemic world, do you have a specific portfolio you are writing in? How do you choose the stories that you're doing?
Yeah, so we don't, there's no beat, you know, in old journalism you see on TV, some guy has the sports beat, some guy has the morgue, you know, and it's not like that with us. We come in on a Tuesday, we meet virtually on a Tuesday, and we have an editorial meeting where we decide what stories are going to be in the paper the next week. And there is a conversation. Each person brings in ideas that they've heard about, ideas that people presented to them, ideas that they just thought of, and we talk about what stories make the most sense, and then who makes the most sense for that story. So, for instance, I might bring in a story about Temple Emmanuel, but because of my position here, I'll never do the story of Temple Emmanuel. Adam is on the board of the Jewish, the Rullo Jewish Institute at the History Center, so he's not going to do those stories. So each of us have certain stories we won't do because of our position as well. So we discuss those, we figure out what stories make the most sense, and then the rest of the day, Tuesday, is spent actually editing the paper that you see on Friday. So we all sit down and go, every person reads every page. We are looking for inaccuracies, we're looking for misspellings, we're looking for words, you know, not just words, but names, you know, everything that you would expect in an edited paper. And then the remarkable, the fascinating, the amazing thing to me is that we finish editing that paper by 6, 7 o'clock, and it is here in Pittsburgh at our office by Wednesday at noon. So the print shop that we have does an amazing job of printing and then shipping us the paper, and it continues to do that even now. So they deserve a lot of credit, I think, for being able to get that work done. So Wednesday, we're done with the paper. We upload it to the internet. We then start the cycle of the next week's paper. And stories are due on Friday, so that gives you 2 days to sort of interview and write, which is not a lot of time. And because for most sources, or for most stories, I try to have 3 or 4 different sources, both because it makes the stories more interesting, but also because it supports the accuracy of what you're writing. And by Friday, hopefully you've turned in your stories, and you're already thinking about what is the next batch of stories that you're going to be working on. So no one has a beat, but we all have feeders. You know, I live in the South Hills. I'm at the JCC out here. I used to work at South Hills Jewish Pittsburgh, so I know people from the various South Hills institutions. So I tend to get fed those stories. Adam lives in Squirrel Hill, works out at Squirrel Hill JCC, you know, is at the grocery store in Squirrel Hill. He knows all of those people. He tends to get those stories fed to him. And then, like as I mentioned, who writes those stories is another thing. It doesn't always make sense for the person closest to the story to write the story.
Makes sense. And what about now, in this during coronavirus crisis? What are you choosing to cover? How do you make decisions about what is unique and newsworthy for the Chronicle?
So the Pittsburgh Jewish Chronicle is our community's newspaper. We're a community paper telling our community stories, I think in unique ways. The Post-Gazette, the Tribune Review, they're covering the national stories. The city paper is trying to be neighborhood, tell the story of various neighborhoods, but we're the only ones telling the Jewish story, the stories that are happening right here, right now. So we are telling the same story everybody else is, which is about coronavirus, but we're talking about how it affects the Jewish community, how it affects Squirrel Hill, how it affects Mount Lebanon and the Jewish communities there. And that presents that. The COVID-19 presents challenges to the Jewish community that aren't present in other communities. You know, we need 10 people to have a minion. And while that's not important necessarily to a Reformed congregation, it's very important to an Orthodox congregation. So are they making a decision to shut down, or are they trying to work to maintain only 10 people in the synagogue at a time? And if so, what does that do to the 11th person? That's a story. You know, another story is, how are we going to celebrate Passover? Something that's always been a community holiday. These are the stories that are vital to our community. And in the end, it's not going to be, I think, it's going to be the group story that gets told and remembered throughout time. So how did the Jewish community react to COVID-19? How did it shape them going forward? And how did that then change what they're doing in the future? So, you know, the conservative community has decided that you can have a minion online right now because you have to, as long as you can look each other in the eye through Zoom. They haven't said they're going to continue that into the future, but maybe that's something they will, and that's a story to tell. You know, another story might be, how are we feeling our group, our communal sense of loss when there is a death and we can't sit Shiva in a room together. You know, when you can't say Kaddish for your loved one the same way you would surrounded by your community. These are all the stories that only the Jewish community and the Jewish community paper can tell. It's not supposed that doesn't care about them. They just don't necessarily know that these stories are out there and that these are the important stories right now. More than anything else, the Chronicle is a community newspaper, and that makes it unique in Pittsburgh, I think. There are a few others that tell their unique community stories, and this used to happen in journalism a lot more. Everything was communal. It's not anymore, but the Chronicle still is. And one other thing I would say is that we are still the one consistent thing that hasn't changed throughout this. Our paper was always delivered on Friday. It's still delivered on Friday. So you can still sit down, grab the paper, and read the community stories that you could before and still feel connected to the community. We're online. We've always been online, but that experience of sitting down with a newspaper and reading about your neighbor, reading about someone in your congregation or your family, you know, it helps the tribes stay connected, I would say.
Yeah. On the subject of staying connected, a great question from somebody who's watching us right now. Have you started to hear back from congregations how this is going? Are the numbers bearing out the effort to use technology?
I actually have had a few conversations with some of the congregations, both in the suburbs and in the city, and yes, membership, or I shouldn't say membership, participation is up probably, if not 100% in some cases, somewhere between 50 and 70% for a lot of these things. That doesn't mean it's going to stay up once we're past COVID-19. But a minion that would typically have 10 or 12 people now has 20 or 22 people. A study group that maybe had 10 people before now has 20 or 25. People are desperate, I think, for connection right now, and they're finding it where, in one sense, where we always have, which is within our community, within our Jewish family. On the other hand, in ways different than we've ever had to do it before. So numbers are up. I don't know if they'll stay up, but yeah, they're up.
Wonderful, thank you. So as you are responding to the needs of the day, or even just as you work on such tight deadlines, imagine there are stories that you want to cover that either you don't get an opportunity, or it's just a bit too amorphous to be able to pull together on that time horizon. What do you wish you got to do more of? What are those stories you wish that this was the appropriate medium to tell?
So the hard part is we are a community paper. That's both our strength and our weakness. And so what I mean by that is there are oftentimes stories that may affect the Jewish community nationally that maybe we don't spend as much time with because we are so focused on the community. And that is always going to be where our focus is. We always want to tell the story of what's happening in a synagogue or in a congregation locally. Sometimes though, there's some interesting stories that would be nice to tell about the national community that we say, there's three of us writing. We can't tell all of those stories. You know, we can't send somebody to cover a story that's happening in Israel. And I would love to tell that story. I would love to be able to jump on a plane sometimes and go to Israel and cover what's going on with their elections right now. But we rely on the resources that we have instead to tell those stories. So we have a lot of different sister publications and partnerships with wire services and those sorts of things. I feel very lucky to be able to tell the story of the Pittsburgh Jewish community. I always wanted to be a writer, and there's no better job than telling the story of the community you feel you're a part of. That's, I think, the best a person can do. I think the reason sometimes that sports columns are so interesting to people who aren't sports fans is because those people feel incredibly connected to that community. And that's what I think makes our paper as well so incredibly well written. Toby and Adam, who've been doing this even longer than I have, are so good at telling our stories and so invested in the community. And we're all invested, and that's an important part of this. So there aren't a lot of stories I don't get to tell. Maybe I would like to tell them in a different way. I would like to tell the story of the Israeli election internationally. I would love to tell the story of maybe something that's happening in Philadelphia that I can connect back to us now. But that's not where our focus is. That's not where our concentration is. And in some ways, that's a lucky thing.
Yeah. Tell me about numbers for the Chronicle. I know that you have an online platform in addition to the hard copy physical newspaper. Have you seen readership numbers respond, or what are people tuning into, clicking on?
Yes, so I have to admit, I don't look at the numbers in terms of what are people clicking on each week. I'm not sure what story any particular week is the hot story in the paper. What I know is we have an incredibly consistent readership, meaning that the paper goes out to the same number of households, the same number of people read online. Our numbers don't falter. They don't go up, they don't go down. They tend to stay the same because most people in the community are reading our paper first for the Jewish news. It is, many years ago I worked for a radio station, KQV, and our listenership was incredibly consistent. We were an all-news radio station. Only X number of people were seeking out news on the radio. It didn't dip. It didn't go up a lot. And I think this is the same sort of thing. We have the same number of readers today that we did before this started, and I'm pretty sure that once this is over, it's going to be exactly the same as well. Where it's a little finicky is that previously people who had been in Florida came home and were reading the paper, probably the physical paper. Now they're probably reading it online because they haven't been able to leave Florida. Maybe they didn't change their subscription to go to forward to their new place, or their place for what they thought was going to be a few weeks vacation. It's turned out to be much longer. So I'm sure that there's a little bit of shift in the numbers that way, but nothing. It's not like we've gained 10,000 new listeners or readers, or lost 10,000 readers. It's still the same readership.
Fair enough. You interview people all of the time. I just stayed at a Holiday Inn last night, on behalf of parents everywhere, we all wish we could stay at a Holiday Inn, but that ain't happening right now. What should I be asking you? What haven't I asked?
So I think the only other thing that I would want to get across is that right now, just like with a lot of other businesses, it is a hard time for print journalism, which usually relies on an advertising base of restaurants and local stores. So if you enjoy reading local news in a local paper, try to find a way to support those papers now. If you have the ability to make a gift, make a gift. And it doesn't have to be to the Chronicle. If you don't read the Chronicle on a daily or on a weekly basis, but you read the city paper, they're struggling right now as well. We're all struggling, and we're all doing something vital. We're telling these stories that aren't going to be told otherwise. So if you can support local journalism, please do so. That would be the only message I have.
Great. Thank you all for joining with us today. Dave, thank you for being with us. I very much look forward to connecting with you in this virtual space soon. Thank you so much.